Don't forget to like the video, share your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe to stay updated with our latest stories. The phone's sharp ring cut through the silence on a Tuesday afternoon. It was one of those dull, gray days when the sky couldn't make up its mind should it rain or just hang there like a heavy blanket of doubt. I sat at my old wooden kitchen table, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold long ago. My eyes wandered to the wet garden outside, where soggy leaves stuck to the stone patio like pieces of old, forgotten gift wrap. The sound came again, ring, ring. I glanced at the phone screen. Unknown number, local area code, but not one I knew by heart. Most days, I would have let it ring until the machine picked up. After all, who calls anymore? It's usually just robots trying to sell me things I don't need, lower rates on a house I don't own, insurance for a car that barely runs. But today felt different somehow. Maybe I was just bored. Maybe something deep inside me whispered, answer it. So I did. Hello? My voice came out scratchy, like I hadn't used it much today. Which, honestly, I probably hadn't. Silence stretched between us. Then I heard someone clear their throat softly on the other end. Sarah? Is that you? The voice belonged to a man. It was deep and warm, like honey poured over gravel. Something about it tugged at my memory, like trying to remember a song you heard years ago but can only hum a few notes of. Yes, this is Sarah, I said, sitting up straighter. My guard went up automatically. Who is this? Another pause. Shorter, this time, but I could almost feel the person on the other end gathering courage. Sarah, it's David. David Miller. I'm Mark's uncle. The words hit me like a cold wave. Mark, my ex-boyfriend. We hadn't talked in, God, it had to be 15 years, maybe more. And his uncle David? I barely remembered the man. We'd met maybe twice at family parties during the 3 years mark. And I were together. He'd always seemed quiet, kind, but overshadowed by Mark's louder, more demanding relatives. Why on earth would he be calling me now? My mind started racing like a hamster on a wheel. Had something terrible happened to Mark? Was there some family crisis? An accident? My heart began beating faster, thumping against my chest like it was trying to escape. David, I managed to say, trying to keep my voice steady. Wow, hello. It's been a really long time. It has, hasn't it? He sounded nervous, almost shy. I hope this isn't. I hope I'm not bothering you. No, not at all. I lied, though my heart was still doing that frantic dance. It's just unexpected. Is everything okay? Is everyone all right? The worry in my voice must have been obvious because he quickly said, oh yes, everyone's fine as far as I know. Nothing like that. I'm sorry if I scared you. I could almost see him in my mind, that careful, polite way of speaking I dimly remembered. He was older than Mark, maybe 10 or 12 years, which would put him in his late 50s or early 60s now. Closer to my age than Mark had ever been, actually. No, it's okay, I said, and I meant it this time. Relief washed over me. So, what can I do for you, David? The question hung in the air between us like smoke. Why call after all these years? What could possibly connect us now? He cleared his throat again. I was starting to think it was a nervous habit. Well, this might sound a little strange, Sarah, but I was cleaning out some old boxes recently. My sister, that's Mark's mother, asked me to help clear out some things from her attic. You know how these things pile up over the years. I made a small sound of agreement, though I wasn't sure where this was going. Anyway, he continued, I came across a photograph. He stopped talking. I waited, but the silence stretched on. A photograph? I prompted gently. Yes, it was from that barbecue they had. Do you remember? The summer before. Well, before things ended between you and Mark. Oh, I remembered that barbecue all right. It was the last family gathering I'd attended before Mark and I had our final, spectacular fight. Hot, sticky weather. The smell of burning charcoal and those citronella candles that were supposed to keep the bugs away but never really worked. Forced conversations and fake smiles all around. David had been there, hadn't he? Quietly manning the grill, occasionally offering a comment that got lost in all the noise and chaos of Mark's boisterous family. I think I remember, I said slowly. There was a photo, he continued, and his voice got softer, gentler. Of you. You were sitting under that big oak tree in their backyard, reading a book. You looked so peaceful, content. I blinked in surprise. He'd noticed that and remembered it all these years later. I barely remembered it myself. Reading had always been my escape at those family events, my way of finding a quiet moment. In all the chaos, And well, he went on, and I could hear that awkwardness creeping back into his voice. I was wondering, would you perhaps consider meeting for coffee sometime? Just to catch up properly. As old friends, you know, my first instinct was to say no politely, but firmly. It felt complicated, messy, even. Any connection between us, however small, was through Mark. What would people think? What would Mark think if he somehow found out? Not that I should care what Mark thought about anything anymore, but then again, why shouldn't I have coffee with someone? Mark was ancient history, a chapter of my life that had been closed for years. And David, there was something in his voice, a loneliness maybe, that spoke to a quiet corner of my own heart. He wasn't asking for anything dramatic or complicated. Just coffee. 1 hour out of my life. What harm could it possibly do? And if I was being honest, curiosity was definitely playing a part. That persistent human need to know more. Why now? Why me? Why after all these years? Coffee, I repeated, looking out at the gray afternoon that suddenly didn't seem quite so gloomy. You know what, David? I think I'd like that. The following Saturday found me sitting in a corner booth at the Daily Grind, a local coffee shop, known for decent coffee and the kind of atmosphere where people minded their own business. I'd arrived 10 minutes early, a nervous habit I'd never been able to shake. No matter how old I got, butterflies danced in my stomach. No, not butterflies. More like small, agitated moths bumping around inside me. What was I doing here? Meeting my ex-boyfriend's uncle felt like breaking some unspoken rule. Even 15 years later, I smoothed down my blue sweater for what had to be the 4th time and took a sip of water. My eyes kept drifting to the entrance, watching every person who walked through the door. The truth was, I wasn't even sure I'd recognize David right away. My memory painted him as tall and dark-haired, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. But time changes people, doesn't it? What if he looked completely different now? What if he didn't recognize me? The photograph he'd mentioned captured me in my late 20s. Now, at 44, the landscape of my face had certainly seen some changes. Lines around my eyes, a few gray hairs I kept meaning to cover up, the softer edges that come with age and experience. Just as I was starting to seriously question my decision to come here, the bell above the door chimed. A man stepped inside, pausing to look around the coffee shop with that careful way people do when they're meeting someone. It was him. I knew it instantly, despite the changes time had brought. His hair was more silver than dark now, especially around his temples, and the lines around his eyes were deeper. But they were still the same kind eyes I remembered, still behind those wire-rimmed glasses. He carried himself differently too, with a quiet confidence that hadn't been as obvious years ago when he'd been overshadowed by Mark's more demanding personality. He spotted me across the coffee shop, and a small, almost hesitant smile touched his lips. He walked over to my booth with steady steps. "Sarah?" he asked, his voice just as warm as it had been on the phone. "David?" I smiled back, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. "Please, sit down." He slid into the seat across from me, placing a worn leather briefcase on the bench beside him. He wore a simple button-down shirt and dark pants, nothing flashy, but neat and well-maintained. There was an air of quiet respectability about him, the kind of man who probably read the newspaper every morning and always returned his library books on time. "Thank you for agreeing to meet me," he said, his gaze direct but gentle. "I wasn't entirely sure you would. I was curious," I admitted honestly. "It's not every day you get a call like that out of the blue." The waitress appeared at our table, a young woman with purple streaks in her hair and multiple ear piercings. "What can I get you folks?" "Black coffee for me," David said. "A latte, please," I added. The brief interruption gave us both a moment to settle, to let the initial awkwardness fade a little. Once she left, David leaned forward slightly. "I hope it wasn't too strange, my calling like that." The photo just. It struck me how different things were then. Simpler, maybe. They certainly were, I agreed. For the first few minutes, we carefully avoided the obvious topic Mark and talked instead about safer things. How the town had changed over the years. The way all the old shops downtown had been replaced by chain stores. The ridiculous price of everything these days. The usual conversation topics that let two people find their footing with each other. But the ghost of my ex-boyfriend was definitely there in the room with us, hovering like an uninvited guest at a dinner party. Finally, David addressed it, though not directly. "You know, Sarah," he began, stirring his coffee slowly with a small spoon, I was always sorry about how things ended between you and Mark. It seemed unnecessarily complicated, unnecessarily painful. I appreciated him saying that. When Mark and I had our final breakup, his family had closed ranks around him like wagons in an old Western movie. I'd felt very much like the outsider, the villain in their family story, regardless of what had actually happened between us. It was a long time ago, I said, trying to sound philosophical about it. We were young, we were. I let the sentence hang there unfinished. What had we been? Young, yes. Foolish, definitely. But also genuinely in love, at least for a while. Until we weren't anymore. Agreed. But still, you always struck me as shaving a good head on your shoulder level-headed. I laughed softly. I'm not sure Mark would agree with that assessment. David smiled, a genuine, warm expression that lit up his eyes. Mark and Andy often have different assessments of things. He's my nephew. I love him. But we're very different people. That admission surprised me. I'd always assumed a united family front. Hearing David acknowledge their differences made him seem more individual, less like just Mark's. Uncle talked more easily after that. He told me about his career in structural engineer, about the projects he'd worked on, his quiet pride in buildings that would long outlast him. He spoke of his late wife, Eleanor, who had passed away nearly 5 years ago. After a long illness, he didn't dwell on sadness, but spoke of her with a deep, abiding affection that touched me. He described the quietness of his house now, the adjustment to living alone after decades of partnership. He wasn't complaining, just stating a fact. But I understood the show of silence he described. He talked about my work at the library's satisfaction of connecting people with books, the quiet rhythm of my days. I spoke a little about my own life, since Mark a couple of relationships that didn't lasted, friendships that had the contentment I generally found in my independence, though admitting, like him, that quiet evenings could sometimes stretch a bit too long. What struck me most was how easy it was to talk to him. There were no pretenses, no games. He listened intently, asked thoughtful questions, and shared his own experience with a quiet openness. The connection I felt wasn't romantic, not exactly, but it was substantial. A meeting of minds, perhaps a recognition of shared sensibilities. The unusual circumstances of our acquaintance. He wasn't just Mark's uncle, he was David, a man with his own history, his own perspective, his own quiet charm. The hour we'd implicitly allotted stretched into 2 as we got ready to leave. Standing outside the cafe shop on the sidewalk, there was a moment of slight hesitation. What now? I really enjoyed this, Sarah, David said, meeting my eyes much more than I even expected. Me too, David, I replied sincerely. It was surprisingly nice. He smiled again. Perhaps, if you're not busy, we could do it again sometime. Maybe dinner. My internal alarm bells, the honest conditioned by years of caution, pinched faintly. Dinner felt like a step up from coffee. But then I looked at him, at the kindies, the silvering hair, the gentle waisted there, not pushing, just asking, and I thought, why not? What was I so afraid of? I'd like that. I said I really would. The surprise and pleasure that flickered across his face were genuine and oddly warming. On that cool afternoon, dinner happened the following week. David suggested a quiet Italian place on the edge of town, dimly lit with checkered black skulls, and the comforting smell of garlic and baking bread. It felt different from the bright public space off the coffee shop, more intimate, more intentional. My nerves were back, but they felt less like anxiety and more like a curious sort of anticipation. What was this connection we were forming? It defied easy labels. He wasn't just an old acquaintance, not anymore. But what was he? He was waiting for me at a corner table when I arrived, rising politely as he approached. He looked distinguished, wearing a sport coat over a button-down shirt. It clearly made an effort, and I found myself glad I'd chosen my favorite silk blouse. You look lovely, Sarah Hazade. His compliment straightforward and sincere, without any hint of practice, said flattery. Thank you, David. So do you. We settled in, ordered wine, and picked up the conversation almost exactly where we'd left off. It was remarkable how easily we talked. We discovered shared interests, a love for old black and white films, a surprising fondness for the same obscure folk singer, a mutual appreciation for quiet walks in nature. He told me about his tentative plans to visit the national parks out west, something he and Eleanor had always talked about but never managed. I shared my own half-formed dream of taking a sabbatical to volunteer at a library in a small town in Ireland. These weren't just polite exchanges. It felt like we were sharing parts of ourselves, testing the waters, finding common ground. He asked me more about my life, not just the highlights, but the textures, the challenges of dealing with library budget cuts, the small joys of finding the perfect book for a struggling reader, the quiet satisfaction of tending my small garden. He listened with genuine interest, his gaze steady and thoughtful. He didn't interrupt, didn't try to offer solutions unless asked, just listened. It was a rare gift. I found myself opening up more than I usually did, talking about the lingering loneliness that sometimes crept in, the feeling of being slightly adrift. Note that my career was established, and the path ahead seemed less defined. He understood. He spoke about his own transition into retirement, the loss of daily structure, the need to find new purpose. It's strange, he mused, swirling red wine in his glass. You spend decades building a life, a career, a family, and then the structure changes. You have to find new ways to fill that space, not just the time, but the emotional space. His words resonated. We weren't trying to fix each other's problems, just acknowledging them, creating a space where those vulnerabilities could exist. With it judgment, during a lull in the conversation, he reached across the small table and briefly covered my hand with his. It wasn't a possessive gesture, or even necessarily a romantic one. It felt more like physical tone. His hand was warm, his stuck, gentle but firm. I didn't pull away. Contact sent a surprising jolt through me, a warmth that spread beyond just my hand. It felt right, comfortable, unexpectedly so. He withdrew his hand after a moment, a slight flush rising on his cheeks, as if surprised by his own action. Sorry, he murmured. Needn't be, I said softly, meeting his gaze. It's okay. That small moment shifted something. The air felt charged, no with awkwardness, but with a different kind of awareness. The ex's uncle label felt increasingly irrelevant, almost absurd. This was David, a man I was enjoying getting to know, a man I felt a growing complex connection with. As we were finishing our meal, he hesitated, then said, Sarah, there's something I probably should have mentioned earlier. About Mark. My stomach tightened slightly. Here it comes, I thought. Mark knows I contacted you, David said quietly. Heck knows we met for coffee and that we're having dinner tonight. I raised an eyebrow. Oh, then how did he take that? David sighed softly. Well, Mark is Mark. He was surprised, maybe a little confused. Asked why I'd want to dredge up the past. David met my eyes. I told him it wasn't about dredging anything up. I told him I came across your photo, remembered you fondly as a sensible, kind person, and was curious how you were. I told him it had absolutely nothing to do with him or your past relationship. He paused, and I told him quite frankly that who I choose to have coffee or dinner with is my own busyness. A small smile played on my lips. I could just picture Mark's reaction, but I also felt a surge of respect for David, for his honesty and his clear boundaries. Thank you for telling me, David, I said, and thank you for, well, for handling it that way. It's the truth, he said simply. My reconnecting with you has nothing to do with him. It has to do with you. And perhaps, he added, a touch self-consciously, with me realizing that life's too short not to reach out to people who made a positive impression. However, long ago, his honesty was disarming. It cleared the air, removing the last lingering shadow of my past relationship from our present interaction. It allowed me to see him purely as David, and perhaps for him to see me purely as Sarah. The rest of the evening flowed easily, filled with laughter and shared stories. When he woke me to my car, the cool night air felt refreshing. There was no expectation, no pressure. Thank you for a wonderful evening, Sarah, he said, stopping a respectful distance away. Thank you, David. I had a really lovely time. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Would it be all right if I call you again? Yes, I said, surprising myself with the certainty in my voice. I'd like that very much. He smiled, that warm, genuine smile that reached his ears. Good night, Sarah. Good night, David. As I drove home, the street lights blurring past, I felt a sense of quiet wonder. This connection, born from such an unlikely circumstance, felt more real, more grounded than anything I'd experienced in a long time. It wasn't about passion or whirlwind romance. It was about understanding, respect, and the quiet joy of finding a kindred spirit in the most unexpected of places. The weeks that followed settled into a comfortable rhythm. David and I saw each other regularly, maybe once or twice a week sometimes. It was dinner, sometimes just a walk in the park on a Sunday afternoon or meeting for coffee. We talked on the phone too, sometimes for hours, about everything and nothing. It felt easy, natural. The initial awkwardness surrounding the Mark connection had faded, almost completely replaced by the simple reality of our growing friendship. Or perhaps something more than friendship. If neither of us rushed to define it. On Saturday, he invited me over to his house for lunch. It was the first time I'd seen where he lived. It was a modest but well-kept older home on a quiet, tree-lined street, the kind of place that felt solid and established. Inside it was neat, comfortable, filled with books, dark wood furniture, and framed photographs, landscape architectural drawings, and point pictures of him and Eleanor Young. It didn't feel like a shrine, but like a home that held cherished memories. Made sandwiches and a simple salad, wait at a small table in his sunny breakfast nook, overlooking a surprisingly beautiful backyard garden. He pointed out the different plants, telling me which ones Eleanor had planted, which ones he was trying somewhat unsuccessfully to keep thriving. She had the green thumb, admitted with a wry smile. I mostly just try not to kill things. I laughed at me approach a similar benign neglect, I call it. He showed me the photograph that had started it all. It was tucked into an old album, slightly faded. There I was, younger me, hair longer, absorbed in a paperback under that big oak tree. Seeing it felt strange, like looking at a different person. You really did look peaceful, David said softly, standing beside me looking at the photo over my shoulder. It was a rare moment, I confessed. Those family gatherings weren't always my favorite place to be in either. Sometimes, he admitted quickly, we stood there for a moment, shoulder to shoulder, looking at the ghost of my younger self, connected by this hard, slightly uncomfortable memory. Viewed instead of feeling awkward, it felt intimate, a shared acknowledgement of the past viewed from the safety of the present. As I was leaving later that afternoon, standing by the front door, he reached out, not for my hand this time but gently touched my arm. Sarah, hesitated, his voice low. I just want you to know how much I value this. Our time together. It's become very important to me. My heart did a little flip. His honesty was always so direct, so devoid of games. It's important to me too, David, I replied, meeting his gaze. The air between us felt thick with unspoken possibility. He leaned in slight line for a moment. I thought he might kiss me. Part of me wanted him to, but he hesitated, then just squeezed my arm gently before stepping back. Drive safe, he said. I understood his hesitation. This wasn't something to be rushed. The connection we were building felt precious, delicate even despite its underlying strength. It was based on mutual respect, shared vulnerability, and a genuine enjoyment of each other's company. Pushing it too fast, trying to force it into a conventional romantic box, might break it. As I drove away, I reflected on how much I changed, how much this unexpected connection had altered me. Years ago, I might have craved the drama, the passionate cliche. Now this slow, quiet unfolding felt infinitely more meaningful. It wasn't just about finding companionship. It was about being centrally seen by someone who appreciated me for who I was, not who they wanted me to be. David saw the quiet librarian, the woman who preferred books to boisterous crowds, the person who found solace in gardens and old movies. And he didn't just accept those parts of me. He seemed to genuinely like them. He wasn't trying to change me any more than I was trying to change him. We were two people in the middle chapters of our lives, carrying our histories, our losses, and our hopes. We had found an unexpected harbor in each other. The climax wasn't a grand event, but a quiet realization that settled over me. During a walk a week later, we were ambling along a path by the river, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows, the air crisp with the promise of autumn. We weren't talking much, just enjoying the companion of bleasants, the sound of crunching leaves underfoot. And I realized with a clarity that was both startling and peaceful that I was completely happy. No ecstatically head over heels happy, but deeply contentively happy. Happy to be walking beside this kind, intelligent gentleman. Happy to have found this unexpected connection that nourished my soul. It didn't matter what label Annie and Niels put on it. X's uncle, friend partner. What mattered was the reality of it, the respect, the understanding, the quiet joy. David must have sensed the shift in my mood because he turned to me, question in his eyes. I simply smiled at him, a genuine unreserved soul. It's a beautiful evening, isn't it? I said. He smiled back, understanding in his expression. Yes, Sarah replied, his voice soft. It truly is. He reached out and took me, hand lacing his fingers through my knee. This time there was no hesitation, it felt natural. Right, we walked on hand in hand into the fading light, not needing words to understand the significance of the moment. It wasn't a fiery beginning but a warm, steady glow promising light and companionship for the path ahead. And for the first time in a long time, I felt truly hopeful, not just about this connection, but about the unexpected beauty life could still offer.